Just
started streaming now.
Welcome everybody to this evening's Climate and Ecological Emergency Advisories Committee on the 10th of June. I'm Ali Gordon-Creed, and I'm the new chair, so a brief introduction to myself. I would say I've been an active climate activist since my 20s. When I first came to the UK, I was busy with my career, but on weekends I was one of those going down to Greenham Common and chaining myself to fences and feeding people. And I've been a member of Greenpeace, and anything to do with animals and climate as in any way, shape or form has been part of who I am. And for the last 28 years, I've been a volunteer on the Aston Rowant Nature Reserve as a surveyor and a warden. And yeah, I think for me, I signed up to be a Green Councillor mainly for protecting nature, increasing biodiversity. For me, the pain of silent extinction that's been happening in the UK has been, to my mind, just inexcusable. The pollution, the lack of care that of creatures that we share our planet with. So I am a very unapologetically and unashamedly pro biodiversity and pro environment being. So that's me. I would like to say thank you to previous members of CEEAC. The previous chair of Councillor Sam Casey-Rare, who's brave enough to be running as an MP, there's two members. Sam James Laurie is a cabinet member now. Alexandrine Cantor and Councillor Ben Manning are no longer CEEAC members, but thank you to them. And welcome to Maggie Filipova-Rivers, Councillor Freddie Van Merlo, Councillor Andrea Powell, Councillor Sue Cooper, some of whom we've had apologies from. Candida, would you like to share the apologies, please?
Yeah, 1 second. We had apologies from Councillor Andrea Powell and also Councillor Andrew Tinsley and Councillor Catherine Keats-Rohan.
Thank you. So before we move on, can I make sure that unless you're speaking, you're muted? Thank you. And can I ask that for those people who were at the last meeting, can the minutes be verified, please? Can I have a show of, I don't know how you do this online, show of hands?
You could ask Chair just if there's any comments on the minutes, and then yes, a show of hands would be fine.
Okay, so any comments on the last minutes from anyone?
I had some questions, but they don't need to be addressed now. It depends on how we think it would be most helpful to address them.
Let's verify them first and then bring that, if that's okay. So are we okay to verify the minutes? Can I have a show of hands? Great. Sue, were you there? Can you verify? No, okay. Okay, is that all right, Candida?
I think as long as there's no objections to them, you can.
I can't see
sign those off.
Everybody.
Okay.
Yeah, can sign those off. Have we had any declarations of disclosable pecuniary interests or registrable interests from anyone? As far as I know, we haven't. No, so that's okay. Do we have any urgent business to attend to before we get to the beginning? No? Fine. I'm going to change the order a little bit, if that's okay. David, I'm going to ask for your update before we do the public participation. If you'd like to do your cabinet member update, Councillor David Ruane.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'm afraid I've never chained myself to anything in the name of climate change, but I have danced on the steps of the Treasury as part of a flash mob complaining about the removal of the feed-in tariff. It's available on YouTube at all good sellers. I have a few quick updates. One is, first of all, by way of explanation as to the cabinet change, we used to have a special cabinet member for climate, which I thought didn't really work. I thought we needed that every cabinet member should be taking responsibility for climate action within their own area, and I should oversee it. So that's the logic behind my taking over as the climate member rather than as having a particular cabinet member overseeing this area. In terms of other updates, I'll read through a few notes that I've got here. First of all is that the team has been developing the new Climate and Nature Recovery Action Plan, and we'll get an update from Chloe in this meeting before we get to the formal new plan. Over the last 6 months, the team's been doing a lot of work to help develop our approach on the local area energy plan, and that is also on your agenda. It's something that came out of the Oxfordshire-wide net zero route map, which gets overseen by the Environment Advisory Group at FOP. Which I chair and which Andrea Powell was our member on. I think Robin Bennett has now taken over as the council's representative on that committee. We've got some good news with regards to funding. We've received good news on our application for the public sector decarbonisation scheme to receive funding for the decarbonisation of Didcot Wave and the Park Sports Centre in Wheatley. Those applications were successful. We are expecting to hear very soon some good news from Innovate UK about trailing new electric refuse vehicles. That's awaiting contracts and would appear to be signed. But the trial is designed to help us understand the practicalities of running electric waste vehicles, which I think we discussed in council. There are particular challenges around the long routes that we have within our district. South Oxfordshire was also part of a successful bid for funding from Innovate UK for a project to develop new markets in Oxfordshire for nature-based carbon offsetting. I think quite a few of us are not great fans of offsetting, in that you spend money and get a certificate to say that you've done some good somewhere, but nobody monitors it. So what we're looking at is working with local nature groups through the local nature partnership, so that it's trusted partners that we're dealing with. I still say that you should be looking to offset anything on site on a new development, but if you can't do it on site rather, then we should at least be using trusted partners locally rather than exporting that responsibility. In terms of nature recovery, during 23-24, we ran a successful pilot scheme to fund nature recovery projects with the Trust for Oxfordshire's Environment, using funds collected by the Community Infrastructure Levy. We were using their expertise because they are already used to distributing funds from the recycling levy, so already know the environment that they're operating in. So we used them, and they have expert assessors and robust processes. So we're confident that the projects that were selected would be delivering, and we'll be looking to that again to extend into next year. And finally, unless you hadn't noticed, after 2 years worth of work by many arms of the council, Wallingford Beach has been recognised for bathing water status. That doesn't mean the water's any cleaner, but it does mean that we're monitoring it, or the Environment Agency is monitoring it on a regular basis, which on the basis of what gets measured gets done. It means that we are more likely to get improvements there because of the publicity and the monitoring involved. And that's been done for now. A lot of those things I mentioned will come back later in the meeting.
Great, thank you, David. Some very good and positive news there. I'd like now, please, if we could hear from, is Joe Lazarus from Cholsey here to talk about what their community has done or doing, which, yeah, I'm very interested to hear about. Welcome, Joe.
Thank you so much for having us. I've also got Jane with us as my fellow resident in this. So yes, thank you very much for having us today. So it's a question, if that's okay. So according to the United Nations, a diet that is higher in plant-based foods and lower in animal-based foods has a lower environmental impact, greenhouse gas emissions and energy, land and water use. The Oxfordshire Food Strategy states that food is both the source of and the solution to many of the problems we face today. To tackle the challenges of health and well-being, climate change and biodiversity loss, Oxfordshire must have a vibrant and sustainable food system. Other councils across the country have already passed motions to increase plant-based food options and promote more sustainable eating habits within their communities, including Oxfordshire, Exeter and Norwich councils. So given this, what considerations has this committee already given to promoting plant-based eating in the district? Would the committee recommend that our council promote the availability of and education around plant-based eating, with priority being given to locally sourced ingredients? And if the committee would not recommend that at this stage, what additional information would be required?
Thank you, Joe. So I think we can't give you an absolute answer right now, but I think all of those questions are being asked or have been asked and are under consideration. And I mean, I can't speak for the committee as such, but I do know that those the questions to do with more sustainable and more locally sourced and more plant-based in general are all part of the bigger picture. And as are working with the local food producers. So so thank you. And I think we will, I mean, I know those conversations are happening quite strongly. And yeah, so please, yeah, Maggie, you would like to say something?
Hi, just firstly, Joe, thank you so much. My messy background is showing. First of all, thank you so much for coming to speak to us. We really do appreciate it when members of the community do. I just thought I'd very quickly make a note. As you know, we as South Oxfordshire did approve the Oxfordshire food strategy, and then following that, we developed a draft action plan. We formed a food action working group, FWAG, and as part of that, we very much did talk to local food producers, food banks, and many other stakeholders. I'm looking to some of the officers to tell me when this will be launched. As you know, we are facing some delays as a result of the pre-election period, etc. But I will I will contact officers and see where we have got to that. But as part of this action plan, and hopefully you will have sight of it, you would be able to also provide feedback and engage with it as well. So we are very much looking at kind of sustainable food systems as part of it. So that's one thing that we have done, and we have definitely got a draft plan. So if I have your details, I'll probably be able to respond to you if you email me and let you know where we've got.
That'd be great. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Maggie. Right. Is that all right, Jo?
Yes, thank you
so
very much for your time. Really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, well, next on the agenda is, I think it's Sarah talking to us about understanding net zero challenge for SMEs in South and Vale.
I'll jump in ahead of you, Sarah, and share the presentation. Is that okay? Yeah. Hi, everybody. So for those of you who don't know me, my name's Nick King. I'm Economic Development Manager for South and Vale. We've been working with Sarah on this study and some related bits of work. So I'll just grab up this presentation. If you give me a minute, and we'll take you through a couple of slides on it. Right, let me know when you can see something. Yeah, happy. Right, okay.
Yeah,
so
I can see that.
Good stuff. Thank you. Just conscious of time, just to give you some sort of brief background on this. Through a fund called the UK Shared Prosperity Fund, which is part of government's kind of levelling up agenda, we had an allocation of funding to support business decarbonisation, and through part of that funding, we worked with Oxford Brookes Business School to research specific challenges to our small and medium-sized businesses in South and Vale. And that was mainly to ensure that when we had a kind of the larger allocation of funding, which actually comes in this current financial year, we were ensuring that we were designing appropriate solutions that fit our kind of businesses and the demographics we have here with the bulk of that funding. So what we wanted to do today was just talk to you a little bit about the findings of that research initially, for your awareness before we kind of publish that report and make it a bit more widely available, and then talk about what we're kind of doing about it based on the findings and what we're looking to commission and put in place in the next month or two. So that's the kind of background. Sarah will come in and talk about the research that the business school did for us. And then we'll come back over to myself and my colleague Karen Tolley, and we'll take you through what happens next and get your feedback from there. So Sarah, over to you. I'll just flip on to the next slide.
Brilliant. Thanks, Nick. Right. So as Nick said, we conducted a survey. We had about 131 respondents to our survey. 52% of those were from South Oxfordshire District Council, 41% from Vale of White Horse, and then small smattering from Oxford City Council and Cherwell District as well, because we'd thrown it open to everybody. We'd welcomed everyone across Oxfordshire to come take part in the survey. Respondents came from a wide variety of sectors, so from community and charity, cafe, retail, arts and rec, professional, scientific. We had representation from the construction sector, tourism and travel. So a very, very wide distribution of respondents there. Mostly they were from firms who were established for 10 plus years. So 66% of our respondents had been established and going concern for more than 10 years, but with a very, very small base. So mostly less than 10 staff, mostly 1 to 2 people, at most 3 or 4 people. So 73% of our respondents were less than 10 staff. Their main challenges, according to them, were access to funding, growing their business. And then on the third came in the responding to environmental challenges item, which is really interesting because when I conducted a similar survey on a UK-wide platform, we were looking at businesses coming in from Northern Ireland, Scotland, Wales, and England. Responding to environmental challenges didn't come in till the 7th or 8th point on their agenda, whereas for Oxfordshire, for our respondents, it came in third in terms of a challenge that they see as at present. And then shortly after that comes making a profit for 27% of the people there. So 64% said they were aware and they fully understood the UK government's intentions for net zero. 32% said they were aware about it, but they didn't understand what it would mean to them or their organization and how they could get involved or why it mattered for them. 4% of respondents were completely unaware, so knew nothing about the net zero agenda or what it might mean for them or their business. Of the people who responded, we find that 19% were fully active in lowering emissions. So they'd already started reducing plastics, switching to energy, green energy suppliers, looking at getting things like LED lighting in and things like that. So they were fully active at this point. 51% were engaged, but said they could actively do more. So there was this huge appetite to be doing more and getting more involved. About a quarter of our respondents said they were doing nothing, but they had a huge appetite and they said they would like to start. They didn't know where to start, but they were very willing to start. 5% said they were not engaged and they were not interested in starting anytime soon either. So we did have those people coming in and answering our survey as well. In terms of barriers to action, we asked these small businesses, what is it that's affecting you? What's stopping you from doing more or acting as a barrier to your action? And 66% said it was access to finance. They simply didn't have the money to be devoting to things like retrofitting or getting their business more in the green zone. 34% said they lack resource internally. So because they were so small in terms of an organization, they didn't have the resource to do it. They didn't have the time to do it. If you're a one-man, two-man band and you're looking at so many other things as a small business, they didn't have the time to devote to doing things like looking at reducing carbon emissions. And 23% said they couldn't understand why they would be interested in doing it because they didn't think they would get a return on investment. And because they didn't see an ROI in doing so, they didn't want to get involved in getting on the green ladder, in becoming more sustainable, in reducing their carbon emissions. We did ask them, are you likely to do more in the next couple of years? So 1 to 2 years, and 70% said they were either likely or very likely to do more. 9%, so a very small minority, said they were unlikely or very unlikely to do more. And then we had about a fifth of our survey respondents sitting on the fence. So they weren't convinced, but they were likely to be convinced if we go out and start talking to them and giving them more information. So very much ears are open, willing to listen, and could be convinced to do more.
Sarah,
yes,
excuse me for interrupting. Just before you move on, there are 2 people who have their hands raised, and I assume it's to address a particular point. Maggie, would you like to say what
sorry, Sarah, did you want to just finish that last one and I'll ask after that, finish the green one?
Okay.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, sorry.
And then we asked them what kind of support they would like in order to get going and be able to do more. And overwhelmingly, 89% said that they would be very happy to get an earmarked small grant. So it was very clear that this would not be an open grant. It wouldn't be open money to do what they like. It would be earmarked towards retrofitting or reducing carbon emissions in some way. And 89% said they would very much welcome some support in this direction. 53% said they would very much like access to a sustainability platform and some kind of information as to targeting their business as to what they can do to reduce things proactively. And 51% said they would like a one-to-one mentoring from a sustainability expert who would sit down with them, look at their business and give them a personalized support plan as to what they can do to get on that carbon emission reduction journey.
Can I go now?
Mm-hmm.
I just a really quick question. So what is the difference between main challenges and barriers to action? Because you've got access to funding and access to finance, which kind of is a similar thing, I guess. And then, or is it main challenges in terms of green transition, or is it main challenges just generally?
So main challenges is what is their business seeing in the more general sense in terms of what they're facing as a business, and then barriers to action is more specifically in terms of reducing carbon emissions.
Understood. I'll leave it there and I'll ask more questions at the end.
I think there was another hand as well.
Yeah, Lee, did you want to say something or ask something?
Yeah. So the thing that I found most surprising in this is that there was no consideration of, or seemed not to be any consideration of how the customers of these businesses would respond to their behaviour. So some of the businesses will have individual consumers as their customers, and increasingly there will be awareness amongst consumers that they would like to put their spending power behind businesses who are respectful of the climate and trying to do what they can. Other businesses will have much larger businesses going up the food chain as their customers. And again, those customers over time will be looking to get their accreditations by changing their procurement towards suppliers who are doing, again, all that they can within this environment. So it seemed to me that part of the story that we would like usefully promote would be you're going to actually get more business, and you're certainly going to be under threat if you don't start moving down this agenda. And secondly, behind that, perhaps to start thinking about what we could do by way of an accreditation scheme for them. And if we think about things like the number of the stars on the doors for the food retailers and that kind of stuff, you can imagine that you might have an accreditation for having undertaken training. You might think.
Sorry, Lee. Sorry to jump in here. Those are really, really good points, which I've taken note of, and I think Sarah is aware of those. We were actually having a discussion about that before the meeting. So do you mind if we just pop on with the...
No, fine. I was just, you know where I was going to go with that. So yeah, okay.
Thank you, Lee.
Very quickly though, Lee, what you raise is something very much on my radar, and we have a different piece of research looking at consumer perception of sustainable businesses. And what Ali was just saying about, the younger demographic, so 18 to 45-year-olds, more and more becoming aware of the fact that they will spend only with sustainable businesses, whether it's small or big business. And so if you don't start as a business changing the way you work, people are voting with their purses, voting with their feet very much. So it is about convincing the people who don't think it is on their ROI. It is in their interest even now to start deploying that sustainability element if they want to have a sustainable consumer grounding in the future because of the 18 to 45 demographic and how they see things. So I'm just going to go back to the recommendation of our project though. So what we recommend is very much based on what people in South Oxfordshire are looking for in terms of support. So we recommend a blended approach to providing support. So we're looking at saying, don't just give people earmark grants, give them earmark grants, but also give them access to a sustainability mentoring expert so that they spend that money in a sensible way that will maximize the carbon reduction for their business. So try a blended approach, and then we can check to see what blended way has the maximum impact in terms of reducing carbon emissions, for instance. The other thing we are recommending is an opportunity to experiment and evaluate with the way grants are given out and combined with other kinds of support, and then to see which has the maximal reduction in carbon emissions in terms of its effect. As part of the report, we also said that another way of looking at things would be to keep funding deadlines open all the way to the end, and then give a treatment group where funding is allocated just randomly rather than using an unproven assessment process, and then have some people who are not allocated funding given perhaps access to just a sustainability platform or something like that, and then compare and contrast to see how much of a difference it has made. So we've recommended some ways of experimenting with giving out the grants, and that is what we are suggesting to look at in this second stage, so that we can see what has the most effect in reducing carbon emissions, and then we can see the efficacy of the best approach in stage 3 and 4 based on that. But that is it from me. I will hand back to Nick and Karen.
Thanks, Samara. I'm sure we'll have a few more questions for you in a moment. So yeah, please do stay on.
Yeah, we'll hang around. Yeah.
Good stuff. So that's a really useful kind of overview of the key findings of the report. What we wanted to talk about is the kind of the interventions and the kind of solutions that we're planning to put in place based on that research. And I think it's worth keeping a couple of things in mind. So the funding will be drawn from the UK Shared Prosperity Fund, and that has its own challenges, mainly around kind of deadline for kind of practical outputs, if you like, or when things must be delivered by, which is the 31st of March 2025. So we've not got a whole lot of time to kind of play with to get things through the door, and particularly to get a grant scheme designed, assessed, get funding out to businesses and allow them time to implement the things that they might want to do. So that's the kind of the key factor. The other thing is the longevity of funding beyond UK SPF is a bit of an unknown at the moment. So we're kind of very much treating it as kind of Sarah's just touched on as a pilot, working out what works and what we may be able to kind of expand in future if we're able to identify additional funding. So we're kind of working on 3 components following the research, and it's worth kind of keeping in mind that the type of business we're aiming for is that kind of 75% of respondents who said that they were engaged but could do more, or weren't doing anything and would like to start. That's kind of what we're aiming at. So we're just about to go out to procurement for programme support elements that will essentially be split into 2 parts. So firstly, we're looking for tools that will help measure emissions and create bespoke plans for businesses to decarbonise. That might be anything from an energy audit for those who have premises, through to kind of wider tools that look at supply chains and all those types of things. And then secondly, that something Sarah kind of touched on a few times is looking for an organisation to develop and deliver a pilot programme that looks to engage businesses, provide bespoke advice and guidance to SMEs who are perhaps a little bit earlier within that journey, and offering one-to-one support for those who need to overcome specific challenges or barriers with implementation or understanding what it is they can do. So that might include anything from workshops, guides, coaching, mentoring sessions. And I think one of the things that we perhaps found out via this piece of research and the reason for commissioning it in the first place was there are so many different platforms, there are so many different options to help businesses start this journey or give them some form of decarbonisation plan. And what we found is that some work better for different industries, for different sectors. And we couldn't sort of recommend a single tool to anybody. There's lots of different things. And as Lee kind of just mentioned, that accreditation piece, there's a specific accreditation that you may seek if you're in the hospitality industry. And we're looking at something called Green Leaf that I think has been rolled out in West Oxfordshire. But it's not relevant if you're in a completely different sector. And obviously, we're looking to kind of appeal to a mix of businesses here. So that's something to consider. The second part of that, or the third part, if you like, is we're circulating a draft grants policy internally at the moment, which would offer up to £10,000 of grant support to organisations to help with implementation of a decarbonisation plan. And we're trying, as kind of Sarah has mentioned, to not be too specific about exactly what type of plan that is, or what platform it comes from, but we'll look at the evidence as it comes in and we can assess what the level of emissions reduced is likely to be if people follow that plan and what we would be funding within that and what kind of additionality that would add. So is it going to accelerate change? Is it going to bring back change that wouldn't be possible without the funding, you know, as people have kind of suggested through wanting 100% grant? So all of the projects that we support will need to demonstrate how it's going to lower kind of greenhouse gas emissions. And we're trying to make that really straightforward as well. I think for potential applicants, you know, we've not got a lot of time to do this. We know businesses are busy, as it's come out of the survey. People don't have the time really, or they think they don't have the time to really go at this. So, you know, putting a big kind of complex grant program in place is not perhaps going to appeal to them. And we talk about decarbonisation and we understand what that means and what we're aiming for. But actually, within a lot of our kind of smaller SMEs, they're perhaps thinking of it in terms of cutting costs, of you know, energy efficiency, like exactly as Lee's mentioned, about how they communicate with their customers and suppliers. And I think part of that kind of mentoring and workshop program could absolutely be around how you market your business as it becomes more energy efficient, more as it becomes greener, really, how you communicate that out to your customers and how you get an ROI on that. So depending on the amounts that we expect to come in through that grant fund, we expect to be offering probably in the region of about 20 grants per district. So it very much is a pilot programme aimed at small numbers of SMEs. The examples of the sort of things that could be funded could be adaptations to commercial premises, could be purchase of kind of equipment that helps lower emissions, so things with higher energy efficiency ratings, could be purchase of technology or new processes, anything that puts kind of new equipment in place that allows you to reduce waste, all those sorts of things. So a whole host of different flexible sort of different things that are capital costs. I think that's probably it from me. Karen, did you want to add on a little bit about some of the things we've commissioned already?
Yeah, thanks, Nick. So we went out for a very small scale procurement, under £10,000 per district, and what the one in South Oxfordshire that won the contract was Tame Town Council, and that was to provide a pilot of very localised business support, and they're running a series of business breakfasts with information for local businesses, and that includes access to energy audits to support them on their journey. So that Tame Town Council are running those. We've attended one of those. They're sort of monthly, and it's just a really good way to gauge the business engagement locally in that area. And then in the Vale, the contract was won by One Planet Abingdon. Again, a series of business engagement events, and including a One Planet Living Festival, which is actually taking place this Saturday in Abingdon Town Centre. So again, just to try and engage with the local businesses and start them on their journey. So we're piloting those. And as Nick said, we've got the other two procurements that we're just about to go out to. But one of the other things that we did that came through in the report, and we haven't, sorry, obviously didn't have time to touch on everything, was that people have problems with their landlords. So they have a lease and they want to make some improvements, but then the landlord might say that you've got to pay them to change the lease, or they're not keen on you doing anything to the building that you don't own. So I think that is an issue that's longer term, needs a solution, and something that we can perhaps look at. But I did notice that the National Resident Landlords Association have just launched some training this summer, and it's a landlord's guide to retrofitting, and it's a way to help, you know, those landlords look at reducing their costs, but also lowering their carbon emissions. So things like energy, installation, lighting, solar, water, etc. So that is a step in the right direction and something we would welcome, but we do realise that we need to probably look longer term at how we could support small businesses with their landlords.
Thank you. There's a few hands, including mine. But Maggie, would you like to ask your question?
Got in there first. Just to say, this is really good, and I think it really gives us a nice starting point for designing some interventions. I hope that we can use this opportunity and having this grant to kind of design such interventions in the hope that there will be more to come. And let's be honest, things are heading in that direction, so it's a nice thing to have. I actually just had a couple of comments. I think Nick somewhat touched on them, but I think it's really important that we look at sectors, because we had an arts and recreation businesses there, and then we had construction. Now I suspect these are the kind of smaller construction companies, but I think kind of transitioning to net zero will look very, very different for them in terms of a roadmap or an audit, etc. But I think also we have a challenge that we have, 98% of our businesses are SMEs. So to deliver that at scale, I think it may be good to run events that are specific to a specific sector. And if we were to have to prioritize, I would say that we have to prioritize the worst polluters, because we want to use that grant as effectively as possible. So construction, I would say, is one. And again, I think one of the things that would be really helpful is to look at different technologies for the different. So, for example, for construction, you can use green concrete, which is actually only marginally more expensive, for example. But anyway, so I think disaggregating or kind of designing our interventions based on sector would be really good, and that would enable us to deliver more at scale. Let's say if we were running business engagements, workshops, or whatever. I also think that size is really important, because the challenges will be different. And my hope is not to just look at small and medium, but actually have a category of micro. And for example, we could look at grants being 100% for micro firms, and then 50-50 for medium, and then 30-70 for medium, because obviously that reflects their ability to borrow, for example, access to finance we talked about, also the time and resource that is available within that organization. So I think it would be really helpful to kind of have a think about some kind of scales for that. I think I'll leave it there. It's just some initial thoughts for me.
Thanks, Maggie. My very quick question was, I assume you have a way that the SMEs find out about the grant in this very short lead up time, but how are you going to be monitoring the results?
So we have some defined outcomes that we must hit, basically through Shared Prosperity Fund, and we'll have monitoring forms that are kind of part of that agreed grant acceptance, that businesses will essentially say yes, they agree to provide us with this information. Then we'll have kind of quarterly triggers that go out, and we'll understand the basics about that. I think what we'd like to do, and just to give you an idea, it's about kind of tonnage of greenhouse gas emissions removed and things like that. But what we want to do, I think, bearing in mind this is a pilot program, is delve far more into and the numbers we're dealing with aren't huge, build case studies out of them, continue to talk with those businesses, really see, and I think, going back to Maggie's point about different sectors, I would hope that perhaps by offering a bit of variation and not being that defined at this point will allow us to see what works in different industries and build case studies that we can then relate and kind of communicate out to people who may be in different industries. So I think that's part of the plan at the moment. There is a wider evaluation piece for SPF as well that we'll feed into.
And are there already support people in place? So, for example, if a micro firm, but that maybe is in the IT that uses a lot of energy plug outlets, to use the plugs that save energy, that turn on and turn off, is there a system to help small businesses become aware of what they could get a grant for with regards to energy saving? Is that in place?
Not that I'm aware of. And Karen, Sarah, if that.
I was just going to say, well, what we're hoping is that with these two procurements that we're going out for, that some of the businesses that go through the process of either one of those procurements to get those decarbonisation plans or sustainability plans, they would then be the ones that come forward to get a grant because they've got the evidence. So to apply for a grant, you will need some sort of evidence to say, you know, why are you going to do this? How did you find out you need to do it? And it might be through either one of those two routes with the support we provide, or it might be because they've been on a platform and they've got a decarbonisation plan that way. So we would hope that they'd have that information. But of course, we've got our own climate team we work very, very closely with. So we would, you know, same with our REP grants, we've got drop-in events and we've got support to help people apply. We would hope that between us and the climate team, we'd be able to speak to people, they'd be able to get in touch with us and we'd be able to provide that support for them.
Great,
worth mentioning as well on that note that we've got a similar scheme, well, a less kind of focused scheme running at the moment, which is the Rural England Prosperity Fund, and that can fund net zero infrastructure for rural-based kind of businesses. And what we're finding in that is people come in straight for the renewables. They come in straight for the solar and the kind of the big ticket pieces that, you know, are shiny and attractive. But we don't really know if they've done the basics at that point. We don't really know if they've done kind of insulation and LED lighting and insulated pipes and those sorts of basic things. And I think that's what we're hoping to achieve by having a more evidence-based approach and a decarbonisation plan in place, that we can really see that there's been a step-by-step kind of process followed.
Right. Denise, you had a question or a statement?
Yes, I think you've kind of preempted me, Ali, in my question. Some of it's already been answered, I think, because I think the pilots are going to be really good, but I was interested in the end of the pilot, again, looking at how the data is collected and measured to see if we have success. And how it will be collated and compared. And will a specific platform be used to calculate the CO2 saved, or are you expecting the grant holders to do it themselves, or for consistency, should they all use the same kind of platform, or, you know, will the officers and the people running the grants and the whole project do the calculations themselves?
So we're asking for it to be driven by the grant applicant, and that's probably kind of pointing back at the research that there are many platforms on the market, and we heard from a few people who had perhaps tried 3 or 4 different ones and had different results, which is interesting in itself and obviously a bit of an issue. But there are, again, different things that may work better for different sectors. It may depend on what you're doing, because you might just be applying to replace a delivery vehicle, for example, where you can actually calculate, well, if I take my existing diesel van off the road and I replace it with this electric vehicle or a bike courier system or something like that, that's quite an easy calculation to do and kind of understand. So it really does depend on the project. And what we're kind of doing within the assessment that we drafted at the moment is almost scoring for different kind of levels of assessment. So is it just something that you've done your own research on and the business would perhaps score quite lowly, but if it's something that you've had a bespoke plan developed for your business by a consultant, then we can perhaps have a look at that, and that would score more highly. But yeah, I think we want to be fairly flexible at this point, because there are so many different options on the market.
Great. Lee, you were next.
I think it's James first. Sorry, Ali. James.
Oh, is it James? Sorry. I'm looking at the.
Just go ahead with Lee first. It's fine now. We're there, so it's okay.
Okay, I was just going to say a little bit more about accreditation. I just think that we should try to have generic accreditation and not go sector specific. I would take the example of something like ISO 9000. A quality assured business. You don't say, am I a quality assured construction business, or am I a quality assured hospitality business, or whatever. You have things that are relevant to your particular world. So if I were looking at accreditation, I might be thinking about, have you done the training? Have you developed a plan that is tailored to your kind of business and the things that are relevant in your business? Have you taken that forward to look at specific deliverables so that you've got a spade ready project, if you like? You've identified potential suppliers, you've identified how you're going to do it. Have you got the funding? Have you knocked that one over and delivered? What about the next one that you're going to go after? And so on, so that we've got some way of generically recognising people. And probably, you know, in an ideal world, this would obviously go beyond South Oxfordshire or Southern Vale. But maybe we could help with just putting the building blocks of that together and encouraging some others to come in and buy into something that would be helpful. So it was just a thought.
Thank you, Lee. I think that definitely there's a conversation to be had between the accreditation element versus the funding element. I think that's very important. James, you're next. Sorry.
No worries, thank you. I was thinking about the conversation about, Nick, you talked about times your GHGs removed. And I was wondering about if we had a sense of minimum hurdle rates from other already established schemes that we've seen in other places around the country. Because I noticed in the report that Sarah and the team talked about, you know, certain ROIs were seen as unacceptable. I was wondering what they were from a business perspective. And then it made me think, well, if we're going to think about grants, do we have a sense of what might be good hurdle rates from our point of view as well?
I was supposed to be broadcasting on the Thursday night.
Do you want to respond to that one, Sarah, based on the kind of research we did elsewhere, or don't worry if not, I'm happy to.
So this is from my conversations with small businesses that I do quite a lot of research with them. So what it seems to be at the moment is that there are lots of consumers who want sustainability-minded products, but they're not willing to pay the price for it at the point of access, especially as you can see in the comments about cost of living and things like that. So as a result, it's the small business having to take the bullet for converting their product into being more sustainable, being more green, reducing carbon emission, but not being able to pass over any of that to the consumer. So at the moment, this is the reason why what we are seeing is that the initial 25-30% of carbon emission reduction is causing a efficiency in terms of reduction in cost savings and things like that. So if I'm reducing stuff in terms of my raw materials, if I'm becoming more sensible in whom I'm buying from, and if I'm reducing wastage, if I'm switching to a more renewable energy supplier, all of those things result in cost savings. So they're happy to do all those bits of actions, all those actions where they think it's ROI friendly because it's resulting also in efficiency for a business and cost savings. But then as soon as those quick wins have been had, there seems to be almost a road bump, because then the next stage becomes more expensive. They have to retrofit or, you know, get a heat pump or things like that, which are much more expensive, will result in spending. And at that point, it seems to result in a slowdown or even a stop for small businesses from my conversations with them. I don't know whether that answers your question though, sorry.
It makes a lot of sense. I was curious about the quantification given what I've seen in other places. And what you've just said seems to link to something else which I picked up in the report about values, about how, and I was wondering how we can capitalise on values being key, given what you've just talked to is what I've experienced as a business person myself, that ultimately taxation and the profit motive seems to potentially be the biggest value I have. So no, it didn't answer it quantifiably, but it certainly was a picture that I recognise. I wonder, Nick, if you've got any experience from a quantifiable point of view, because I'm curious about the experience other schemes have had in other places that we can learn from, basically.
Yeah, I still think there are so many different things happening around the country that finding any consistency with the data at the moment is tough. And that's part of the reason for kind of commissioning the research, was actually because there is no sort of national centralised leadership. We're finding that each area is kind of designing their own interventions. And obviously this one's kind of, it's working within the confines of UK SPF and what's kind of achieved in the short term. So, you know, when we're talking about figures of £10,000 grants, you know, we don't really know, I think at this point, is that going to be enough to get people going? Is it going to be an attractive amount? It very much is a kind of a finger in the wind. based on some kind of data of having looked at decarbonisation reports for things like community centres locally and smaller businesses that were done through the Low Carbon Hub and Concept Energy and some other kind of local suppliers. And my feeling is that this is kind of aiming at the low-hanging fruit that lots of businesses can do, but are putting off because that ROI isn't seen as being there at the moment. And there are so many other things that businesses have to be conscious of. But the one thing that we get consistently coming into our inbox is there any help for support with our energy costs? And like Sarah just kind of touched on, switching to a green energy provider, it may not be top of the list for people because there may be a cost kind of issue with that. We've had hospitality industry, having to go away from single-use plastics and things like that. And again, there's a cost element to all those things. So I think really what we're aiming to do here is kind of get people started on that journey. And I think if we can bring in the side about how you communicate that out to your customers and your suppliers, people you're supplying, that will start to gather some pace. But it is being completely honest, it's a bit of a finger in the wind, and we're hopeful that we've kind of, with the research that we've done and the conversations we have with businesses, it's the right guess, if you like. But a lot of this is about putting a pilot in place and figuring out what works and what doesn't for the longer term.
Thank you. It's really helpful to hear you talk about it in that way, and I understand why you wouldn't have quantification at this level. Thank you.
Yeah. There's not masses of kind of national data, and part of the reason we work with Brooks was because Sarah and her team had done a national study that we really wanted to build on and drill into locally. So we have got some starting data, but it's very much something we need to continue to explore, really.
Thanks, Nick. Sue, did you want to jump in there? You're on mute, Sue.
Don't think she is, but we can't hear.
Maybe your volume's down. Something's not working. No, can't hear you.
I'll have to pop it in the chat, Sue, and see if we can pick it up there.
She did put a question in the chat earlier, actually, if that's helpful to know.
Let me have a look. Yeah, on the platforms. Is that the one, Sue? Yeah, lovely stuff. So as I kind of touched on earlier, mixed feedback, really. I think people are getting different results from different platforms. And I think the whole conversation before we commissioned Brooks was around looking at a platform called Zella, which we quite liked internally when we had a presentation from them that kind of, asked you lots and lots and lots of questions about your business and then populated a decarbonisation plan for you that broke it down into a step by step. And actually the component of it we really liked was when you got to the point of, well, here's what we do about it, it linked you into local suppliers who could then help you with that part of your plan, or even as David touched on earlier, investing back in a local kind of carbon offset or inset, if you like. So that had some really good advantages. But again, speaking to businesses about it, it was way too much work for our micro businesses because you needed to kind of go through a big initial assessment and then keep on top of it. And we were finding that unless you had somebody in your organisation who was dedicated to sustainability, which again, until you get to a certain size of business, perhaps you haven't, people just didn't have the time to do it. You then got very simple tools like on the government's SME Climate Hub, they have a emissions kind of measuring tool. And again, that might not be far enough for some people. So I think the market's still kind of working itself out. There are a lot of kind of early entrants that don't seem to be too well developed. There are a lot of things that will give you a bit of information for free. And we don't perhaps know quite at the moment what is the right platform, and it may depend sector to sector. So it's something you'd expect that perhaps in the next few years, there may become a few market leaders. There's also been local solutions, people wanting to build local tools that are Oxfordshire specific. But that, again, I don't think is possible within the confines of the funding we have at the moment, but maybe something we look at over the longer term.
I was just going to add on that, Nick, that we did look at, before we did the research, we did look at some of the platforms, didn't we? One of the key benefits of having a sort of localised Oxfordshire platform would be that we could collate quite in-depth data about the people using the platform, and it would give us a really good evidence base and quantify some of the things that people are doing. So that's, I guess, an aspiration for the future, but we're nowhere near that stage at the moment.
So the hospital she is in is a
33-minute
drive.
I think Ali's frozen. Has Ali frozen?
Or an hour.
Am I frozen? No. Am I? I'm here.
No, we can hear her and see her.
Yeah.
Maybe me. Just a really quick comment there. I do like the idea of a catalogue of local solution providers. I think it's kind of in line with community wealth building and our aspirations around that as well. So it's kind of two birds with one stone. And my question is, what can we as the committee, I mean, what is it that we could help with? Or perhaps do we want to put any recommendations for Cabinet at this stage, or is it just to note, Nick and Karen and Sarah?
Yeah, I think for me, we want your help in kind of spreading the word about the availability when the programme support and the grant support becomes available, and obviously it's going to be in limited numbers. But I think the research hopefully is useful to kind of note, and we'll share that with colleagues across Oxfordshire as well, because I think it's, you know, it's going to be applicable to perhaps everywhere, but City and Sherwell, where they have slightly different makeups, but in West it's certainly kind of relevant. And yeah, we welcome suggestions, feedback. You know, by all means, I'll pop my email in the chat before I leave today, and do pop anything across that you'd kind of like us to note. And it's obviously going to be part of the forward plan. You know, in South, there's a big risk, I think, with the age of the commercial stock that we have. A lot of it was kind of built in the 1950s and is very kind of energy inefficient, and there is legislation coming forward around kind of minimum energy efficiencies that would prevent people entering new leases. Lee's made a point in the chat about landlords and the need to kind of to start to retrofit and make changes to make buildings more energy efficient. And, you know, push will come to shove at some point. At the moment, there are lots of exemptions, and, you know, depending on the government, it may go back and back and back. But at some point, that's going to need to come in. And if we can be ahead of the game, it's going to help us be competitive as a district. If not, we are going to risk losing businesses to places where you have more modern stock, and Vale would be one. Across the border, and Reading would be another. So it's really imperative, you know, this is a starting point of a lot of work over the next 10, 15, 20 years. It's something that's going to give us a bit of data and a jumping off point, hopefully, to do more in this area.
And just out of interest, sorry, James, that kind of just as a follow-up, in terms of the ageing stock, presumably that could somewhat be addressed via JLP by providing, you know, anyway, you know what I mean. So you have fed into that process.
Yeah, certainly captured in the employment land needs assessment, and hopefully will follow through into various plans and policies.
Thanks, Nick. Just while I think about it, I could do it directly, but also I think Lee, it might be useful for Lee to put in his thoughts about the accreditation scheme, just because he seems like he's thought about it a lot, and I think it might be really useful, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I think, are there any other hands up still?
Got James, I think.
James, are you still wanting? Is your hand still up? Are you?
I've got one other question. I mean, I could have several, but I'm conscious of time as ever. I noticed in the appendix you're talking about a couple of people talked about data being their biggest carbon issue, and I thought that was really helpful because it's so invisible to many people, and it's so common probably across any sector to this point about sectors. And if we think that web services are starting to rival air travel in terms of carbon emissions globally, it struck me that there might be something that can be done, and really think about Maggie's point about community wealth building, some exemplar projects where it may be that the funding helps them choose and change web service providers and demonstrate the actual decrease. And this may be something for us as SODC as well, because, you know, there are loads of carbon emissions in the background which we don't think about, and that could catch so many different people in different places, because there probably isn't a single business you didn't speak to which uses web services. So it's just struck me listening about joining those dots up really, and it kind of fits with one of these first points as well about procurement policy as well, and it affects us, not just SMEs, but it affects us all. So I guess it just gave me thinking about high profile common exemplars that many other people could copy, and we get more bang for our buck with the kind of projects that we then support.
Yeah, and I think I can see Karen's eyes lighting up in the background, because we published the Green in the Web guide for businesses a couple of years ago now, didn't we, Karen? It was about basic things that every small business, even if you're a home-based business running a website, and the uptake and the engagement of that was really good. But we didn't really have the next part of the plan, which was monitoring all of the changes and what happened through that. So it's certainly part of one of those pieces of procurement, is to do more of those common guides that affect every businesses, and kind of distribute those and actually do a lot more around the monitoring the effect of that. So yeah, happy for you to say that.
Just going to add, Nick, that one of the town council, their business breakfasts, the next one they've got coming up, I think it's the 28th of July, is all around web services and Green in the Web. So that's for businesses. That'll be the next business breakfast. So yeah, it's very, very much on our radar to promote and support that.
Yeah, and those little projects have been great, just to put boots on the ground and appeal to a lot of businesses who perhaps don't come to us first or don't go to the LEP, but they'll go to their local kind of community groups who are working on this, and they feel more comfortable in that environment. So that's been another good real pilot that allows us to work locally.
I remember when you put that out, Nick, I started deleting many more of my emails as a result, which definitely helped. But that said, I have 70,000 in my council one. So I always think for FOI purposes, maybe I should keep them. But yeah, I think I have definitely been more conscientious. Just really quickly, I know that we don't have huge amount of manufacturing SMEs, but I think we're talking about premises quite a lot. But there is also, and kind of links to how we use digital services, I guess, it's process and actually greening the production process. So which is, of course, it won't be relevant to all businesses, but it's not just about premises, reducing energy use. And I think that's where having something as tailored as possible would be really, really good.
I'm just conscious of time. Sorry, James, go ahead.
I won't say anything else. I know there's been a lot of talk from a couple of us, but Maggie, you got me going as well, thinking about, I wonder how some of the coaching that you were talking about on the mentoring could help SMEs think about the partners that they choose, not just then from web services, but who they actually provide their services to, because that, of course, has a massive impact on their Scope 3 emissions. And there may be people they may be really good from a profit margin point of view, from a financial wealth, but they may be disastrous from an effect on society point of view. So it's helping them think about this in decarbonisation as well as a triple bottom line kind of idea. So, and for us as well, think about who we partner with probably has a big impact. And we could perhaps ask ourselves some more questions on this as an organisation as well as the SMEs. Sorry, Ali. This is a good area.
Fine. I think, well, for me, that's kind of the function of this space is to generate energy and ideas that decarbonise all round. So yeah, this is good. Are we okay now to move on? I feel like Karen and Nick and Sarah, I want you here every time. It's brilliant. Thank you so much. But I think we now need to move on to Jessie, who's going to put us up to date with the LEAP, if that's okay.
Yeah, of course. Hi, everyone. Good evening. So I'm going to give a very short update on the local area energy planning workstream, or LEAP, as Ali just called it. The acronym doesn't quite work, but that's what we're going with. This is something that has been raised lots of times over the last couple of years in this meeting and many others. And as David said at the beginning, it's one of the actions that came out of the Oxfordshire Net Zero Route Map and Action Plan that was published in 2022. To give a really quick kind of example or summary of what it is, a LEAP is a spatial plan that maps all of the existing energy infrastructure of an area And then it evaluates the current and the future energy demand and talks about the range of possible scenarios and technologies going forward in order to reach our net zero targets. There isn't a statutory duty on local authorities to have a local area energy plan, although local authorities do tend to be the organisations that lead them. But I'm just going to run through sort of the reasons why we think that this is an important thing for us to pursue. So firstly, kind of the big picture thing is we've discussed previously at these meetings that about our role as a local authority in reducing district-wide emissions. So we obviously, for our council operations, we have control in theory over those carbon emissions, and it's within our gift to reduce them. Whereas for the district-wide emissions, we don't have direct control, and therefore there is a limit on what we can do. Developing a local area energy planning workstream is one way that we as a council can influence reducing the district-wide emissions. So we think that's an important thing to do for that reason. We know that we need major updates to our energy system to reach net zero. There are many examples already of renewable energy projects that are facing long and frustrating delays for grid connections. And the local area energy planning process will produce a plan of actions that we need for us to transition to an energy system that is suitable for net zero. It will provide information to the district network operators about where the upgrades to the systems are needed and when those are likely to be. And it will allow them to have more targeted investment in the energy infrastructure that will help us to deliver our net zero ambitions. The other thing that the plans will do will identify the most suitable solutions for our local areas. And it can also identify alternative solutions where there isn't sufficient grid capacity, and there is unlikely to be for quite a long time. We can look into alternative things like use of battery storage and renewable generation and things like that. And finally, the local area energy plan will have a relationship with the forthcoming South and Vale joint local plan. The local area energy plan will help the distribution network operators to understand the projected energy consumption based on our existing local plan and the emerging local plan policies, because it will incorporate information about where areas of future growth are and what other changes will be as a result of those plan policies. But the timescales for the two plans are not aligned exactly. So this local area energy plan is estimated to be finalised in summer 2025. So it won't be available before the joint local plan is submitted, and therefore it in itself won't be able to influence the content of the joint local plan, and it can't be used as an evidence base for it. However, it will be useful to us as the local planning authority in the future in helping to create an environment in which the policies that we hope will be in the joint local plan can be delivered. So particularly by increasing certainty around grid connections. In terms of how this process is working, we are working with all the other local authorities in Oxfordshire on this work stream, and the proposal is to contract consultants to produce a local area energy plan for the whole of Oxfordshire. The first bit of this is like the data collection stages, and we're proposing that will be done at an Oxfordshire-wide scale. And then the subsequent more detailed scenario and action planning will be done at a district scale. So we will have control over those district scale local area energy plans. So at the end of it, there will be 5 local area energy plans for Oxfordshire, including one specifically for South Oxfordshire. Alongside the delivery of those actual plans, which will be written by consultants, there will be work across the county to build up our in-house capacity and expertise. So officers from the climate team, which I'm part of, and also planning policy teams and a couple of others across the council have been feeding into the process so far. But it is a very technical subject and we're very much learning as we're going. It's also an emerging field of work. So there are places that have done it already, but not that many who are really, really far along the journey. Oxfordshire County Council do have a dedicated energy planning team now, and they are the ones that are leading on this work, but we are very much involved. In terms of budget for this work, there is no district expenditure proposed at this stage. The Future Oxfordshire Partnership has already allocated £150,000 from the Oxfordshire Growth Capacity Fund to the local area energy planning process, and a further bid for an additional £450,000 from the same fund has been submitted if we get that budget approved, that will be sufficient for us to have district level leaps like I was discussing earlier. That decision from the Future Oxfordshire Partnership has been delayed because of the general election, but so it's now going to be taken at the FOP meeting on the 30th of July. If we get the budget approved, the procurement of the Oxfordshire leaps will be led by Oxfordshire County Council, but we will be involved in that process. The intention in terms of timescales is we are going to be writing the procurement specification over the next coming months, over the summer, ready to go out to market at the start of September and appoint the consultants in the autumn. There are a limited number of consultants who can do this work. I think there's 6 main ones, and we have already engaged with all of them. And then if it all goes to plan, as I said earlier, it's expected that our district local area energy plan will be finalised in summer 2025. So there's not really a particular ask for this meeting or anything like that. This is just to update you all, but I'm happy to try and answer any questions. There will be sort of further opportunities further down the line to feed into that, particularly when we get to the district level scenario planning and prioritisation process. So hopefully we can bring in more discussion then. But yeah, happy to try and answer any questions.
Thank you, Jessie. David, you have a question?
Not necessarily a question, but to add to something that Jess just said as the council's representative on Future Oxfordshire Partnership. We have raised some queries around the request that's coming forward. First of all, we need to be convinced that this is the best use of that Grothdale money. I mean, it's definitely a good thing, but is it the best thing? Is the first question. And the second is the amount of officer time that would need to be put in by each of the councils, which, as we know, isn't for free. Unless it's donated, but I think we might break some minimum wage rules if we did that. So yeah, there are still some questions to be answered as to before we agree to the funding of it. But it's definitely a good thing to do. The questions hanging around it are whether this particular piece of work is good value for the money that we're being asked to spend.
Thank you. Lee, did you have a question?
Well, a series of points related to what David was just saying. I think with all these things, you have to set up a baseline case, which is do nothing, and say, what is it that when we do this stuff, what is it that we change? What is it that we improve? Would SSE exist without us? Well, yes. Would they plan future energy usage and demand and look at what capacity they have? Yes. Would they try and figure out how to distribute that stuff from where it's generated to where it's consumed? Yes. Would they look at all the timing issues of demand versus supply and so on? Yes, too. So what is it that we can add to the party? Well, I guess we can possibly contribute something in terms of how much we aim to grow the population and the number of houses and the number of businesses and the nature of those businesses and what their demand is. We might be able to add a little bit that way. There might be some philosophical things as between where could we have, how much grid capacity do we need with storage or without? Yeah, can I just get to the point?
That's what I'm asking. I'm not sure where you're going.
I'm just saying I think it's the right thing to do, and I think it's okay to do it. I just think I would like to go for the light version rather than some of the heavy versions that I thought were suggested by some voices in OCC, and who seem to think that the only problem for us is to put a big thumbs up to any planning application that comes along and agree whatever the impact on the landscape, the habitats, or any of the other things that we quite care about alongside climate change in this grouping. So I just want that to be carefully looked at and not to go heavy on this.
Thank you.
By all means, let's work with SSE.
Well, yeah, I mean that you've kind of touched on. For me, my question in there was, what can we add? Well, I think what feels really important in deciding on the path we take with this is to join the dots with all our other aspirations with regards to the nature recovery plan, with regards to the corporate plan, with regards to the JLP, that we don't take action on just isolating, plugging all the gaps of energy use without that thread running through that does that still fit with our fit for purpose area plans to do with energy and biodiversity and nature recovery. So yeah, that's the piece for me that feels really important to make sure we hold.
And all their budgets come from us in the end.
Yeah. Great. So James, did you want to add something in there? Sorry. You're on mute.
Thank you very much. I think you asked a really good question, Ali, but I felt like you answered it as well. And I was curious, Jess, if you wanted to add any more to this point about the gap that we're filling, because this seems rather important when David talks about, quite rightly, we have a limited resource. You wrote about in the report about how we might need to make a more justifiable proposal or whatever. So I'm curious about what is it that we'd really feel, what would we do here that other people can't do that is worth us investing in this?
I think some of it is picking up what Lee was talking about as well, is that these are also being very pushed by the DNOs and the energy system itself, and they are really keen for us to do it and to work with them a bit more. We do already share information with them through a process called the distribution future energy scenarios, but it's quite piecemeal, and there isn't that a very good flow of information between local authorities and the energy system at the moment. And this is a way of doing that better, is kind of the main thing, I think. Did you want to add anything, Dom? You turned your camera on.
No, I suppose one of the biggest areas of decarbonisation we know we need to hit at a district level is actually not about the new development. It's the demand for new development is relatively predictable if you know the number of houses and you know what they're going to be powered by. It's actually the transition of our existing housing stock, which is one of the biggest single contributors to carbon emissions in the district. That's part of the problem. It's understanding from our perspective. Obviously, we have our net zero targets for the district and the county and so on, and how those feed up into that process. Because to decarbonise all of our existing housing stock, apart from being an enormous challenge, it's how do you power that? Because that's going to exponentially increase the levels of demand on the grid. In both in terms of input and drawdown. So input from micro generation schemes on people's roofs, solar and so on, as well as the drawdown, because of all of these properties and things are going to be powered by things like ground source heat pumps, air source heat pumps, potentially heat networks and all sorts of other technologies, which are all reliant on energy from the grid. So I think there's a whole bit there as well, which I don't think anybody particularly understands that well at the moment, and that's the issue. So the district network operators looking to work with us to try and understand this whole picture. So about the new developments, about the existing developments, about the future demands, where are the gaps, and putting this whole package together into a digestible format which will help inform their future investment. That's the purpose of it.
Great. Oh, good. Let's hope it works. It's a start. Great. Thank you, Jessie, very much. And now we're going to have an update from. Oh, wait, James, you wanted one more. Did you have one more thing?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I think this is probably the best time to ask this. Reading that report is very helpful, and it made me wonder about the conversations we have from a water infrastructure point of view. And obviously the EA does a lot of work on this, DEFRA does. We know our relationships with Thames Water have various facets to it, but I wondered, is there an equivalent to the to the layup or whatever for water infrastructure that we're involved in, that looks at this future demand point of view from all the things you two have just very eloquently talked about?
No, is the simple answer. I think no, there isn't. I mean, I don't know. I mean, Thames Water obviously and the water companies take a very different approach to understanding the demand for development, because they're working in a different regulatory environment as well. I won't go into too much detail on that now, but they have a legal duty and obligation to provide both sewage infrastructure and water infrastructure. So if you answer if they can do something, of course they're going to say yes, because that's that minimum legal requirement. There is no process yet available to review those that demand. So I mean, it's something that's desperately needed, clearly.
Okay, a gap for us, perhaps. Thank you. Thanks, Ali.
Change in planning policy. Right, on to a verbal update from Chloe, Senior Climate Action Officer.
Hi, good evening. I'm just going to share a few slides with you, so bear with me. We'll hopefully those appear. Hopefully you can see that all okay now. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
Perfect. So, yes, good evening. This evening, I'm going to provide a bit of an update on the progress we've made so far in developing the next iteration of the climate action plans. So, the working name that we have for these at the moment are the Nature and Climate Action Plan for 24 to 28, and the addition of nature in the title is hopefully emphasising the additional focus on nature within this plan as a progress from the previous iterations that finished this year. So this new plan is to be adopted at the end of the year, in line with the timeline for the development of the new corporate plans as well, and they will cover the same 4-year period of 24 to 28. So the process began last autumn when we started the review of the current climate action plan. So looking at those long-term actions that are included within that plan that we need to bring forward, and whether we keep those in their current form, how we shape those, and the kind of best format for those going forward. We'd also considered the new legislative requirements that have come through, for example, the Environment Act, and any context around that we need to include in the plans. The next stages was officers from our team, the Climate and Biodiversity team, have collated and drafted new ideas taken from our research, working knowledge, and the development of the team and their specialisms over the last couple of years, and also identifying any gaps in the current plans, such as nature and adaptation, which are kind of key areas that will be taken forward. Back in January, some of the CEEAC members will have been part of the task and finish group that we held to capture members' ideas across a range of themes and give that chance to input in the early stages and kind of take forward the direction of this next plan. We then, following that, launched an internal staff survey to seek ideas from South and Vale officers and capture their thoughts on any items to be included, perhaps gaps in the current plans, and kind of really using their different working knowledge of their service areas and specialisms to make sure that that's captured within the development too. So this formulated a really long list, essentially, which we have now refined and kind of analysed all the responses we've had, collated some of them together, and cross-checked any suggestions from all streams to make a current shortlist, or what we're calling shortlist of actions. And that has approximately 50 actions across the varying themes, which should be just appearing on the screen now. So at the moment, that's looking at organisational net zero, so our service delivery and things that are directly within our council operations. It's then looking also at district net zero and breaking that down both into partnerships and some of those boards that we're a part of and different strategies and focuses there. And then next down to communities, so looking at that engagement, behaviour change and including businesses such as we've already talked about this evening. We've then also got a set of actions around nature recovery and adaptation as well. So the next steps in order to develop these further. So our team have an internal workshop this week to refine the draft actions, shape those into clear actions that are consistent, and also developing the measures to enable us to really strongly monitor the progress of the plan and how we're meeting our targets. It will then be time to meet with heads of service to brief them on the proposed actions, gain their input, and also it's also an opportunity for refinement, so looking at how they want to shape those for their service area, and importantly gaining commitment as well for the actions and taking those forward. We will then be putting also in a dedicated CEEAC meeting dedicated to looking at the draft plan, and the date of this will be to be confirmed, but this will be following the summer after we've done the previous actions. And then it will be taken through the democratic process, so through to FMT and Cabinet lastly for sign off at the end of the year. So also just to touch on where we currently are in terms of our thinking for reporting on the progress when the new plan's in place. So a key thing for internally is to make sure that this process is also in line with the corporate plan reporting, so there's not duplication, and also offering similar as it is now, so it's the same cycle as the corporate plan. The current thinking is this will be an in-depth reporting cycle once a year, but with more live data available more frequently, and we're looking at different formats and things that we can include in a data dashboard. The idea is as well for this to be a live plan, so it will be reviewed in depth. We can add, amend actions, conscious of the fact that it's a 4-year plan, so a lot may change in that time, emerging priorities, strategies and other action plans coming forward, new partnerships, national context and other legislation changes. I think a really key area of focus, particularly for the review and kind of changing, for example, is adaptation and nature recovery themes. So there's currently an emerging local nature recovery strategy for Oxfordshire. So we're at the stage of that being developed. So we're not able to put the detail of that within the plan, but that will be something that's really important for us to take forward within this, as well as similarly with adaptation. So the Oxfordshire adaptation route map and action plan will be emerging over the year, and there's current workshops going on around developing that. So again, that's something else that we'll need to track and be able to take forward within our plan as well. It will also give us the opportunity to remove and mark complete any completed actions and kind of highlight our progress and really track this against our targets. So that concludes my briefing for this evening. Thank you, and I'm happy to take any questions on where we currently are with the plans. Thank you.
I have a question, please, Chloe.
Yeah, sure.
One of the things that has come up in in a few ways, a few different contexts, is would there be a possibility of members of CEEAC able and willing and free to enter that conversation a bit earlier, or attend a workshop along with, so that there's not such a divide between officers and us, that we kind of know more about what's going on behind the scenes at the time rather than after the event? Would that be possible? Do you think? It doesn't have to be for that particular one, but it would. I know that there are other members who've thought it would have been really nice to enter this discussion earlier in certain ways. So
yeah.
As we're
Yeah, sure. I'm sure Dom and I can talk about whether we have another task and finish group meeting kind of prior to that formal CEEAC meeting to take that forward. Yeah.
Thank you.
We are hoping to have a task and finish group in probably once we've got the initial draft list of actions. We'll look to run another joint task and finish group to feed back on where we've got to and get a bit more feedback before we have the sort of the more formal process later in the year. So that's definitely part of the plan, yes.
Great, thanks, Dom. Maggie?
Just a really quick question. Chloe, you mentioned adaptation roadmaps that are being worked on. Who are they being worked on? You said they're workshops. Just out of interest, who's leading on that particular aspect? Oh, Dominic? Either of you?
Yeah, I'll answer if you like. So it's the County Council pulling together so, you know, obviously we've got the Oxfordshire Net Zero route map and action plan. Mm-hmm. So the climate adaptation net zero, oh, sorry, I'm getting confusing my words here. Climate adaptation route map and action plan obviously sounds very similar. So it's being developed by the County Council. So they are going to get it to a certain point. So they are doing one piece of work which covers the whole county. They are then going to be doing a separate commission to look at how that impacts their own operations and what their element of delivering that is. So once we've seen that and we're inputting into that process, we can then decide whether we need to develop our own action plan or whether we can, for example, use the annual review of our nature and climate action plan to incorporate some additional actions within that, which are then drawn out. So I think we're sort of in the wait and see phase at the moment to see how that goes. If it's a piece of work which we think is gives us some of the answers we need as to what our priorities might be, and then we can integrate some of that work in if we think it's appropriate.
Great, thank you, Dominic. And I certainly think it's nice to have adaptation quite clearly spelled out. We've been talking a lot about mitigation, but I think we need to give due attention and focus to adaptation as well. Mm-hmm. So yeah, let's see then. Let's wait and see, as you said. Thank you both.
Great. I don't see any other questions or comments, so thank you very much, Chloe.
Thank you.
And now we're on to you, Dom.
Thank you. I'm going to give you a very short presentation as well. So if you want to, somebody wants to shout when they can see.
Can see it.
The presentation, I'll put it on presenter mode. So so this is the local nature of Oxfordshire local nature recovery strategy. Now, I'm sort of hoping that a fair few of you have been involved in the various workshops and sort of participation events that have happened over the last since about February, March time. There's been quite a lot of activity going on. So I've borrowed this couple of slides from the County Council. So just by way of a brief reminder. So local nature recovery strategies are a statutory requirement we now have to fulfil. So they will cover the whole of England, and we have to basically produce them between now and the middle of next year. And for the first time, it will give us a clear national picture as to what we should be doing to ensure we're properly addressing the ecological emergency across the country. Also, it will link into new sources of funding from things like biodiversity net gain and from the government's environmental land management schemes to actually help us to deliver some of these things. So I'm just going to give you a brief update on the state where we've got to now. When local nature recovery strategies were set out, it wasn't entirely clear to those of us who were supposed to be producing them exactly what was required. But over time, DEFRA have drip-fed various pieces of information to the point where we now think we've got a reasonably clear picture of what needs to happen. And it is reasonably prescribed, so we do have some ability to change things, but to a large extent, they relatively closely prescribe the process we have to follow to produce the strategy. So the flow chart I've put up on the screen here. This is the one that was published when the regulations around LNRSs were produced earlier this year. So it's just showing sort of where we've got to, really. So the first step was to produce a map of areas which are effectively what are the good bits that we know about already. So that has been done and completed. So these are all of our sites of special scientific interest, local wildlife sites, the areas we all know are good for nature. So that frankly wasn't a very difficult thing to do, and it's been completed. Step 2, in the initial production of local nature recovery strategies technically isn't required, but we've taken the decision we're going to try and map some of this stuff anyway. So this is where people have been taking action for nature already, in effect. So for example, if a local parish or town council had done a lot of work over a number of years restoring a field and creating wildflower meadows and so on, but it hasn't attained a sort of a designated site status, at the moment it wouldn't be captured within the strategy. So we've actually done some work to try and map this, and there's a mapping tool now which is online, available on the County Council's website, which allows people to input data into that to say, actually, we've been doing stuff in this area for the last 10 years. It'd probably be really helpful if you captured that. So we're actually addressing step 2 already. Step 3 is about describing the county, why it's important. So as part of that, we've used lots of, unsurprisingly, existing pieces of information like the Oxfordshire State of Nature report, looked at the existing conservation target areas, some of the national character areas, the Oxfordshire Wildlife and Landscape Study, and the sort of state of Oxfordshire's river. So data from wherever we can find it to try and understand what we've got now, what are some of the issues, what should we be looking to prioritise. We've then gone through the most recent stages through a process of public consultations, which I'll just mention a little bit more in a minute. So this helps us to understand what our priorities for nature should be in the county. And then the other important part of that is then to begin to map those. And we've done some testing of this. So all of the information from the various workshops and public consultations and the stuff we've collected above here then feeds into these 2 areas to produce 2 things. So there'll be a map which sort of shows our nature recovery network ultimately, and then a statement of what the biodiversity priorities are. And that is what forms the local nature recovery strategy. So I mentioned the workshops and surveys. So they happened between February and March, and so we had over 1,000 people partake in those. And I and other members of the team were actively involved in helping to coordinate and run some of those workshops. And they were, I think they were very well done in the end, and the level of attendance, so over 1,000 people for a local nature recovery strategy, I think is actually a pretty decent level of attendance for this sort of subject, perhaps reflective of the level of interest in the county in nature recovery. So that involved a survey. It involved, so the survey was, we had 650 responses to the surveys, and hopefully some of you were able to contribute to that. There were 12 workshops with over 300 attendees, and then there were a number of sessions specifically run for individual organisations, parish councils and other organisations. And I mentioned earlier that the map where you as local councillors and in your local communities can go in, and if you know of stuff that's happening at the moment or is planned to happen over the next 5 years, you can input those into this map. It's live on the Oxfordshire County Council website, so you can input into that now. And then on May the 8th, we held a sort of a wrap-up seminar, which just gave all those people who contributed to the workshops and so on some feedback on the initial findings and where we were going. What's going on at the moment? So there are many working groups. So the County Council are the responsible authority for this strategy, but all of the district councils and the city councils are what called supporting authorities, and we have a statutory duty to help the county council pull this thing together. And frankly, it's in our interest. You know, it's a key part of our corporate plan priority to restore nature. So it's very much in our interest to do this. And it is actually an enormous job when you start to look at the numbers. So one of the roles was to pull together all of the species experts in the county. So all of those ladies and gentlemen that go out collecting moths in the dead of night and counting this, that, and the other. And they came up with a list of 879 priority species which needed to be dealt with. So clearly we can't have a priority that involves 879 different species, but so we needed to pull that down to a short list. There's a lot of work going on at the moment to reduce those big numbers down to something which is achievable within the course of a local nature recovery strategy. And we're also pulling all of the information obtained from the surveys, the workshops and other data together to try and work out what the priorities are and how it should be mapped. And all of the logos on the right hand side are some of the main contributors to this. But I mean, there are literally hundreds of contributors. So that's not everybody by any means. Just to briefly then the timeline. So we've completed phases 1 and 2. So we're now sort of working on producing the draft plan, and the plan is that goes out to a public consultation in September, October time this year. At that point, we hope to have a CEEAC task and finish group, at which we will specifically discuss the LNRS and what South Oxfordshire's response to that is. So this is obviously a draft piece of work, and there is an opportunity to influence how it goes from there and put our views forward. So we'll pull that together as soon as we know the exact timeline for the publication of the draft strategy. And then the final strategy will be published in spring 25. After we, as South Oxfordshire and all the other local authorities, have taken a decision that we're happy for it to be published. So that will be the process going forward. So that was all from me. So I will stop sharing my screen now. And then if you have any questions, I'm happy to try and answer them. So I think Maggie's got a hand up.
Okay, I don't see it, but
it did.
I don't. Not this time.
Okay, no, it was still showing on my screen. I've stunned you all in silence. Excellent.
I mean, yeah, I mean, I have questions about, how do you get that short list, down to a short list, who's being consulted? Yeah, no, I mean, it's a piece of work. Yeah, I responded to the survey, and I had lots of opinions working on a reserve for the last 28 years, and also seeing the degradation around my area of the world, and that conflict between development and nature recovery. Yeah. I guess one piece for me is that, so this is a almost like a county-wide and a district-wide plan that so there are organizations within the cities that have been doing a lot of work to bring nature recovery and biodiversity back into urban areas, but this doesn't seem to focus on that so much, does it? Am I right in that?
No, it focuses on everywhere.
Everywhere.
I mean, obviously the city isn't south of Vale, but so all of the sort of urban wildlife groups and everybody has been involved in part of this, and it's clear that the strategies, from the guidance we've had from DEFRA have to cover literally every part of England.
Right. Yeah. I could say a lot more, but I won't right now. Thanks, Dom. Does anyone else want to say anything? No, we're good. So now it's task and finish group update and future items, suggestions and topics.
So if I start it off by obviously, so we've mentioned having a task and finish group on the climate and nature. Sorry, got it round the wrong way already. The nature and climate action plan. Once we've got the sort of draft idea, so that would be a joint, because it's going to be a joint plan with the Vale, and it will be a joint task and finish group. So we had obviously the initial one to kick it off, to gather your ideas, and this is where we come back to you and show you the initial thinking. So that will be one, and then just trying to think of the other ones we've got coming up. Rather than me trying to remember them all now, perhaps it's an opportunity for anybody else who's got other ideas around what we might want to do in future to bring those up now.
James, did you have some ideas?
I was curious, Dom, could we look at both treasury strategy and procurement strategy specifically from a CEEAC point of view, given we are an advisory committee to Cabinet, and we do look at those things in scrutiny, but we tend to look at them at a certain time of year or a certain point. And I just thought it might be really helpful to get the talent that is on this call to look at it from those lenses, given they're central to what we do as an organisation.
Yeah.
Can I just say, I was about to suggest exactly the same, James.
Yeah. That's a good idea. So one of the pieces of work we're kicking off very soon, which Heather Saunders is going to be leading on, is a review of our approach to Scope 3. So I think that neatly fits into that category, and it's certainly something I think we'd want you involved in as we develop our. It's essentially we want to review where we are now and then where we need to be, and clearly procurement is a very central part of that thinking. So that's something we will be looking at. But yes, we're happy to think about that. The other thing I'd forgotten, but I did actually mention earlier, was that we will have a task and finish group on the local nature recovery strategy once the consultation is out. So you'll be able to feed in your responses to our corporate response to the local nature recovery strategy.
Right. Sorry, I'm just sending trying to do a thing to Sue. Yeah, go for it, Tony.
I was just going to say, I sort of support what James is saying. Obviously, we need to quantify the level of, what the weighting that we would give to this particular element. But yeah, I would certainly think it needs to form a key part of procurement strategy.
And finance.
Yes.
Yeah. Great. Well,
and just to say, it fits with the timeline, because there have been some discussions around ethical procurement and investment and kind of reviewing and fine tuning that. So it certainly does fit in with kind of ongoing thinking,
ongoing actions. Yeah. Great. Okay. Well, I'm sure we'll come up with a lot more to task everybody with, but for the moment, does that feel like we're done?
On that, yeah, before we finish, can I just go back to item 3? I had a couple of questions about that, about the minutes, which we said we're going to come back to, Ali. Is that possible?
Oh, yeah.
Dom, I think there are 2 questions for you, and then there's a question more for us broadly. The first was about the climate impact tool and the trial of that, and just wondered, how's it going? What have we learned? How's it changed? Decisions that are being made?
Yeah, I'm going to bring Jessie in because she's leading on that one and she's just doing some work on it at the minute. So, Jessie, do you want to come in there? Unless Jessie's dropped off the call, which perhaps she has. Okay, I'll cover that one off then. So we're currently reviewing. So we've done a process of reviewing the plan with a whole selection of people who've used it. So the uptake of it so far has been pretty good. I think that we estimate between sort of 40–50% of corporate decisions have actually had the climate impact wheel associated with the report. So that's a very visible sign that they've actually done this. The other sign is we've had people from all the different service teams coming to talk to us, asking us. It's been a great instigator of discussion about how they can better consider sort of climate impacts of the decisions they're making, and whether that be procurement or developing a project or whatever it is. So we're currently going through the process of pulling together a paper which will be going to our senior management team, very much recommending that this continues and becomes a compulsory part of the corporate decision-making process. So rather than, at the moment, it's a voluntary endeavour, although, as I've said, the uptake has been pretty good. And we're hoping that within a very short while that will become a mandatory part of the process. So to sort of be clear, then we are making some changes to it, minor changes. We've been doing this a bit iterative process as it's been going on along. We've also recognised that there are some types of decision that actually just do not lend themselves to this, and there's no legal place to include this. So we have got a short list of things which are exceptions where you don't have to use the tool, but we're still asking people to come and talk to us, and they still have to include, for example, a statement about the climate impact of what they're doing within their report, but they don't actually have to show the climate impact tool. So in summary, then it's been well received by staff. I think they found it helpful, which was obviously the intention, and we're hoping it will be a mandatory tool very soon.
Thank you. Thank you. That's good. And I guess from what you're saying about the report, that you'll communicate some of the examples where it has worked and where it hasn't been helpful. Because it's just
we've got stuff on the website already, but we'll add to that. So there's quite a lot of interactive help. Actually, is it on the website? It's probably on our Jarvis system, so our internal staff system. So there's all sorts of information on there for internal teams where they can see examples of it having been filled in. They'll find out of all of those things, and there's actually an online tutorial which people can watch as well, which talks through how we do it. And we've run some engagement session with staff at lunchtimes who they've signed up and come along and learned about it. So.
Okay, thank you. Then my next question, or second question for you, Dom, was just about UK 100, which we've touched on a couple of times now. I couldn't see us on their website yet. I mean,
the simple answer to that, we are in the process of joining. It's not an immediate process. So David, as leader, has signed the UK 100 pledge, which was part of that process. And the next step is that we're setting up a meeting with UK 100, after which we will be able to announce our membership. But it does seem to be a bit of a drawn out process, but it is happening, be rest assured. And hopefully within a few weeks, we will actually be able to announce it.
Brilliant. And I think that then plays my question for all of us, and just thinking about what we do in scrutiny, where we have a kind of an item which is an update on recommendations from previous scrutiny meetings. Is there something that we can do here so that would kind of preempt people like me asking these questions, Dom, that you could share, look, this is what we've done on UK 100, this is why it's taking some time, or where we're at on the climate impact tool? You know, would that be helpful? I wonder what other members think and you think.
So we do, well, part of the answer to that is we do produce a monthly members update. Now, I don't know that that's necessarily distributed to everybody, but we do provide that information in that form. Now, whether you ever get to see that, I'm not sure, but I suspect for most of it, there's no reason why we couldn't share that with the CEEACs. So we could do something similar for CEEACs without, and we wouldn't be creating any additional work other than going to a different email distribution list.
Okay, cool. And it's not about, I mean, if it's just a verbal telling us where we're at, because I think the last thing any of us want to do is cause you more work.
It's literally, because we have to do it anyway. It's literally a bullet pointed list of what we, each month, what have we been doing, and some of it will obviously relate back to previous CEEACs. Some of it we wouldn't be able to publish all of it because some of it has information about things that are ongoing that we can't talk about publicly, but for the bits that we can, we certainly would be able to do that. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. Okay. It looks like we might be done. Thank you so much, everybody, for your time and all that amazing input. I think we can now end this meeting. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Dom?
Put myself on mute. I've just seen a note in the chat saying that that our monthly members updates actually are already shared to all councillors on a monthly basis. Now it's possible that obviously the UK 100 thing hasn't been shared yet because it's not been made public, but yeah, you can see it on that basis.
Great. Thank you.
Okay,
Have a
Susie,
good evening, everyone.